Hey guys, welcome to the new episode of the Andy Social Podcast. And once you're done here, make sure to head over to Goat King Writers Club.
Where we never let grammar get in the way of a good story.
Good yarn.
Yarn? Story? Yeah. Fuck, doesn't matter, does it?
Well, it does when we're doing the promo for it.
Oh, well, that's what they're getting.
Also, come and check us out on YouTube for full video versions. Enjoy the show.
Hey, welcome back to my little show. Before we kick into it, you know what I'm going to say, Patreon. Come and join me on Patreon, patreon.com/Andy Dowling. It is the best way to support this podcast, and support starts from only $1 a month. That is my goal for this year, is to get as many $1 supporters as possible. The more I get, obviously, the better it's going to be, but it's the ultimate accountability piece, the ultimate motivator. It keeps me fired up. It's the reason, Patreon is the reason why this podcast exists in 2021, and it's the reason why there's 2 episodes a week. Firing on all cylinders. I'm absolutely loving it. It's because of the Patreon community. There are additional tiers there if you want access to the Patreon podcast each week, or giveaways and free stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff over there. So go over to patreon.com/Andy Dowling. Hey, it's the Andy Social Podcast, episode 293 of Me Little Show. And my guest on this episode is Mike Solo. Mike is He's the man. He's the man behind Birds Robe. Birds Robe is a record label, a management company, a booking agency. He's a tour promoter, a publicist, a publisher. I'm just basically reading everything off the Birds Robe website here. He's a machine. He's an absolute gun. And he's been a part of the Australian music scene for the past, well and truly over a decade. Sort of kicking off a lot of his involvement with Birds Robe back in 2008. And he's done so much for Australian music. A lot of the bands that he's worked with have gone on to have incredible success. And not only does he run his label, but he manages Sleep Makes Waves, Closure in Moscow. And he's a musician himself. He's an amazing drummer and has played in a bunch of bands over the years, just done incredible stuff. And he's someone that I really admire as a person. And you hear me gush quite a bit in this episode. I'm going to have links in the show notes. Of course, birdsrobe.com is the place to go. Most importantly, before we kick into this episode, is that Mike is running a Kickstarter campaign at the moment for a Birds Robe documentary called This Is Family. And just reading off the Kickstarter page, it's a documentary series covering the story of Birds Robe Records and the artists who define the Australian post-rock and prog scene. It's an incredible project that he's undertaking. He's got a bunch of people that are working with him to make this a reality. It's going to be a series. There's a lovely story here, a lovely story that sort of really contextualizes what he is planning to do. And this Kickstarter project ends on the 23rd of May. So, folks, if you're listening to this on time, please go over, click in the show notes and click through to the Kickstarter campaign. I'll have a link right in there to make it nice and easy. And throw him a couple of bucks. Let's see if we can get him to his goal and really, I was going to say kickstart this project. Well, there you go. That's the way that it works, doesn't it, Andy? Anyway, enough crapping on from me. Please enjoy this great chat with the man himself, Mike Solo.
First of all, congratulations on charting with Lord and that amazing Savage Garden track, which is one of my all-time favorite tracks. And I love that you guys did that song. And I love that Darren Hayes listened to it. And I love that it's this record that charted you guys. I just think it's about time. Really. It made me happy in so many different ways. So yeah, I'm sure you guys are stoked about it. And I know, all the behind the stuff, like there's a lot of work involved, but I just thought it was like an awesome thing. And also kind of like a cool thing to happen at this time. Like there's not a lot of wins happening for the music industry side of things. And, to get a nice thing like that must feel really good. So yeah, well done.
Thanks, mate. That's very, very nice of you to say, especially coming from you. I mean, you're somebody, I think, from afar, although kind of in different spaces, if we're going to really sort of niche down on genres and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think what you do and the hustle that you've put in over the years, it's something I certainly admire. So for you to sort of make that make that comment and make that acknowledgement is pretty cool. And for us, I mean, geez, I mean, who would have thought an old crusty 80s heavy metal style band gets into the charts? I mean, it's a bit of a novelty. So, you know, we'll certainly ride that wave and try and make the most of it. But yeah, it was a nice little surprise and nice little tip of the hat, especially when it's, you know, I mean, for us, it was meant to be one of those interim releases like a lot of bands are doing, just trying to keep it moving. Don't want to put all their eggs into one basket with a new, you know, album or anything like that. It's like, okay, how can we stay in the public eye? And it was something for, you know, the inner circle of our followers and supporters, and it kind of just took a life of its own, as it sometimes does. So yeah, it's I don't know, it still hasn't sunk in yet. I think as soon as that happened, I went into full on hustle mode, PR mode. How can I just keep milking this and keep the wave going? And I think it's only just starting to come down now. But yeah, I need to sit back at some point and sort of think, oh yeah, okay, that actually happened. It wasn't just something that sort of swept by. Here's a quick little thing.
Oh, it's great, and as you say, you do. You know, you're supposed to trumpet those things out there. Like, you're supposed to let people know. That's kind of the point of things like that. And look, I don't think, you know, I think every time you write your bio or update your press releases in future, and it's always going to be a line in there, you know, I think you'll get a kick out of it every time you get to write it, or just, you know, copy paste it into the new blurb for whatever is next. But you know, I think the other thing you said is like, yeah, we live in this world where you always have to keep the ball rolling and keep in front of people and keep relevant and always have something coming out. But I really like that you guys, you know, keep having fun with it, and obviously put out a project that was fun for you guys to do. And that just happened to be one of the things that like caught on. And then the other great thing is it didn't just make the chart, it stayed in the chart. And I think that, like, you know, it's a cool thing to be in the charts, just like for a fan to see that, but to stay in it, like, that is such a huge thing. I mean, at least for me, but you know, like, it's not just a bunch of orders and then it drops off to number 50,000. It stayed there, you know? And I think that, like, that is amazing as well. So yeah, you should feel great about it.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's certainly new territory for us, and I think it opens up. I mean, it's so funny, like, after all these years, and I know, you know, I was writing down a bunch of notes to sort of touch on when we were having this chat, and I was going through some of the achievements that you've had as a label with all the artists and all these accolades. And it's funny now for us, so many years down the track, that suddenly some of these things are starting to fall into place, or the pieces are fitting in, where you can sort of see, okay, there is actually other possibilities here where we can go off in a different direction, to try and get some more accolades and some more recognition. And to be honest, it's just about being a little bit smart to begin with and channeling it in the right direction. And I think that's something that a lot of bands struggle with, and they don't understand that. I think when you lift the hood, not to say that it's easy, but I think when people understand, you know, how to sort of tick the boxes and make sure that you're in the right spot to be in the running, to be recognized, I think people realize that those achievements aren't as distant or as unachievable as what people tend to think. So for us, like, that second week, I mean, that opened my eyes up straight away, because I could see the sales, I could see the figures, I could see what it was taking to be able to maintain that. And I just thought, okay, I'm starting to sort of strategize and thinking, okay, what do I need to do to keep this going into a third week? And now, like, all we're talking about in the band is like, well, when the next release comes, how can we be even smarter than we did this time? And how can we really lay it out and really put a good game plan in place to make sure that we do a true campaign that doesn't just, you know, excite our fan base, but it also ensures that we can elevate into this more of this public domain. It's something that's just it's been a recent light bulb moment.
I love it. I love that you're doing that. I love that it's not just like deer caught in the headlights, but it's like, oh, hey, this was great. Like, let's not just stop there. Let's apply it to our next thing. And, how can we make it that little bit better, or, just make sure we're not going backwards, or feel like we've done everything that we can to tick all the boxes. And then if it happens, great. If it doesn't happen, we're not left wondering, and that's sort of the thing where the artist is left wondering. That's or just even the fan is left wondering, oh, this band should be bigger than they are. Why aren't they? That's just the thing that is like compelled me to do so many things over the last 10 years, and there's so many things, like, you don't know what you don't know, and then suddenly something happens, or you have a 30-second conversation with someone or whatever, and then suddenly it's like, oh, that's how you do it. Okay, cool. Well, now I know to do that every time. So yeah, I guess I'm talking a bit vague, but this is a great example of that. Like, just this thing that has happened, but now you know the figures that underlie it. How it all kind of works, and how sales translate into a chart position, and it can be more complicated, like the time of the year and who else is released in the same week, and all that kind of stuff has a big impact. But ballpark, now you have a really valuable answer to a question that a lot of people don't know the answer to, which is like, how many sales does it take? How do we even get them counted for the chart? All that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think it's great as well that it's, a band like you guys that have the opportunity to see what that is, and then hopefully take it a step further next time. So yeah, good times.
Man. Oh, just I feel like the mad scientist, and I've always, and this is why I sort of really admire what you've been doing over the years, because it's real hands-on. It is DIY. It is building something from nothing. It is that experimentation of just trying lots of different things. And no doubt over the years, you've had so many things that have just absolutely failed miserably. But but out of that, you've had these great successes as well. But I mean, that's part and parcel of what you need to do, and I love it. I love the experimentation when it comes down to, like, even just the minutiae of, like, before I gave you a call, I'm just looking around my little office here. I've got parcels and parcels of just like merch orders that I've been packing up, and it's so tedious and boring at times, but I'm like adding all these extra things into them just to excite people, and I'm trying to work out what's going to retain people and putting little messages in there. I'm thinking about sort of that, that return sale and people coming back and ordering more things in the future, and keeping a list of those people and recognizing names and thinking about what they bought before, what they haven't bought before. And that's just from a merch point of view. But then, it goes into the marketing, it goes into the PR, it goes into just all that networking that, over the years, you've built so many relationships of having a beer at a pub or at a gig with somebody, but you never do anything with it. And then eventually down the track, you go, okay, now I know where these pieces lie and what I can do to hopefully give someone else value. And then in turn, eventually get an opportunity down the track as well. So there's just so many things. I mean, when I was sort of writing down notes to talk to you, I'm like, oh man, I could just talk about so many different topics. Just in that whole space of just creating something from nothing and just trying to see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, firstly, thanks so much for the kind words. I really appreciate that. And yeah, all the things you sort of mentioning there, it is the tiny details, that sometimes become the things that you fixate on and that actually make a difference. And yeah, look, I'm always happy to talk about anything all day long. It's good fun. I always get something out of it because, it's like gathering other people's perspectives on all this stuff is pretty much how I've learned the way that I want to try and do things. And one of the most important things that I learned really early on is you never stop learning. Like you never know everything. It doesn't help anyone if you pretend like you know everything. it's always useful to just like put stuff out there and say, hey, how do you do this? What do you do with your merch orders? How do you send them out? Do you put handwritten notes, or do you like put flyers, or, how many a week do you do? Do you have a contract with Australia Post? Are you using recycled or plastic? Like whatever it is, even just in that one, element of, doing stuff DIY. And maybe all the answers are like they're doing exactly what you're doing, and that's a great validation. Or maybe they're doing something that you've never even conceived of, and you're like, oh, that's an awesome idea. Can you hook me up with that supplier or whatever? Or maybe you're the person that's giving someone else advice, and you get to feel good about that, So yeah, like I'm always happy to talk about anything, and it's things still continue to evolve and change over time, and I'm always like fascinated, especially by self-managed groups, and really just like artists, well, really people in general. Like, what are the goals that motivate them to do things? What are the things on their bucket list? Like that has become kind of a go-to line when I sit down with an artist. It's like, what are the things that you really want to do? Like, what excites you? And everyone's got something different, whether it's like we want to chart, or we want to make a living from music, or we just want to make an album and have as many people as possible hear it, or we just want to play a headline show to 156 people because our previous best was 153, or we want to sell out the Tote, or the Zoo, or the Annandale, or the Rosemount, or we want to play in Europe. Whatever it is, like however big or small, one person's goal isn't any more or less important than someone else's, because you know how much joy it brings you when you finally get to do something that you've dreamed of doing, whether it's playing in a different city or playing in a different continent. Like, those things can mean the same thing in terms of the happiness they bring to two different people, just because it's, their starting point is different. So I'm all about like trying to facilitate that stuff. And then if you're lucky enough, you get to tick some of those things off your bucket list, and you enter the other side where it's like, oh, what's next? Like, because, as humans, we just continually want more. Like, it's never enough. So, oh, you had 156 people. Next gig, I want 200 people. Oh, you played one festival, and now you want to play 3 festivals. Oh, you put out an album and it charted at 27. Now you want to put out an album and chart in the top 20. Whatever it is, people want more, and so it's like, oh, how do we keep this thing going so that everyone's still having fun and enjoying it, and we're getting great music and art out of it, and people aren't just getting bored or burnt out, or feel like they're on someone else's treadmill just for money or whatever. And that's also a question for myself as well. Like, how much do I want to keep living vicariously through other artists' successes, achieving things that I was never able to achieve? And, how does that fit into my overall life, and what's the balance for other artists' lives? I feel like I've just gone down some rambling path. So,
well, a question I was going to have, because I find that, I mean, I'm sure those types of conversations happen with a lot of different labels and independent sort of management and things like that with artists. But I still feel that that's such a fresh and unique take, because I think when you look at it from afar, when you just focusing on a label, there's certain metrics, and you're trying to generate sales, and I guess you can look at it from a very black and white perspective. It's a series of functions that the record label operates in and provides. and that might be the be all and end all. And I guess the success of some labels is that they're probably far more hands on or a little bit more immersed with the artists themselves. But I guess an interesting question could be like, with when you guys started out back in 2008 and trying to like get this thing up and running, and what the origins of Birds Robe was at the time. Did you have this thought in your head that it was about providing that platform for other artists? Was it about sort of I'm trying to think of a better way of wording this.
Yeah. No,
rather than for selfish intentions for yourself, were you already in that sort of proactive wanting to help others and lift other people up straight away? Or was that something that sort of evolved over time and the pieces started to fall into place?
That is an awesome question. Yes. Let's go back and do some chronological history or something. So, I was playing in a band, and my band was playing, some like 70s inspired prog rock stuff. And the bass player in the band and the guitarist in the band were like, oh, in the 70s, there are all these like jam sessions and collaborations between people. And, maybe we could like start this idea of a collective of bands. And Elephant Six Collective, which was like a early 2000s collective based around some indie experimental rock groups in North America, was an example that Alex, the bass player, brought up, just saying, oh yeah, these bands got together and like kind of started their own label and played a lot of shows with each other, and a rising tide floats all boats. Like everyone brought their own little audience to the shows, and so it was something that became greater than the sum of its parts. Because when you're in a band gigging in the underground, you're literally just trying to convince the venue to book you, and the venue needs 120 people on a Thursday night. And so you book 4 bands who can each bring 30 people, and there's your 120. And we were doing that, but we were playing with bands whose, there'd be a folk band and a metal band and a punk band. And so everyone would bring their 30 people, but, none of those audiences really wanted to listen to the other bands. They were like, we're here for our friends and we're not interested in whatever weird music you're playing because it's too different. And that sounds like an oversimplification of like humans in general, because we all know people listen to all kinds of different music, but that's just how it was. Like sometimes people go out to have a live music experience and they really wanted to just have a night of heavy metal or a night of awesome folk music or a night of funk and soul. And to have this big jumble of styles, I would love it. I would listen to all that stuff, but not a lot of other people are, the Venn diagram, like the overlap isn't going to be big enough. So there was some frustration for us. We're like, how are we going to make new fans? Let's try and find some other like-minded bands, and that'll help build our audience. And so, to answer your question, the very initial concept of getting a group of like-minded bands together was to try and grow the band that I was in. But what then happened very quickly was we found this other band called Captain Kickass and the Awesomes. So my band was called Florence Jam. We saw this band called Captain Kickass and the Awesomes in Sydney who played awesome, like psychedelic math rock. And the first time I saw them, I was like, oh my God, like this is one of the best bands I've ever seen. And there's like 27 people in the room. Like more people need to see this band. And I just had this moment of like, well, we got to like do gigs with them because more people need to see them. And, when you see an artist that you really like, you kind of really hope that they'll like your band too. So maybe they'll like us. And so we became really close friends with them and started trying to do more gigs with them. And our audiences both really liked each other because there was some overlap in the style, and they're just awesome people. And so, you know, the sort of self-interest started to fade away. I was still very self-interested playing in my band and trying to book all these early gigs. But what soon happened is, like, no sooner had we started this Birds Robe thing and found a bunch of bands in Sydney that we thought would work really well together, then my band decided that we were going to write just more like straight up Led Zeppelin blues rock and not do 25-minute prog tracks anymore. And so I had this sort of period of reflection where I was like, oh, well, what's the point of booking all these gigs if my band isn't going to play them and I'm not going to benefit from it, right? And I was maybe thinking about this for like a week, because it was just like, oh yeah, my band is having much more success doing normal music. I've got my hands up with, and I went to go and see a band called Space Project play a gig. They were like part of the Birds Robe collective by then, and they were just playing some other gig. And I just sat there watching them, getting goosebumps and like almost crying when they reached this awesome emotional peak to one of their tracks. And I just said to myself, oh, this is why I'm doing this, because I get this feeling like my band's not playing tonight. I've got, no financial interest in this, but this band and all these other bands just make me feel amazing, and they deserve to be heard by more people. And so that moment flicked the switch completely over to, it's about just trying to get all these bands as much exposure as I could. And, whether it was Space Project or Pirate or Captain Kickass and the Awesomes or Toe Hider or Shanghai or like whatever, any of those little bands that I fell in love with, I was trying to get them all in the same lineup, get everyone to watch each other, and I would like talk them up like crazy. And I don't know, like, a good analogy would be like, let's say you've got a best friend from high school, and then you've got a best friend from uni, and that they are also going to be best friends as soon as they meet each other. And so you can't wait to introduce them to each other. And then you introduce them, and then you anxiously wait to see if they're getting on really well. And then when they're getting on really well, you're just like, yes, or whatever. It's like you're introducing your romantic partner to your parents, and that they're going to love each other. And then when they actually do, it's not only a relief, but it's like a genuine joy, because now, like, you've made this connection, you've helped make this connection. And I didn't expect that I was going to feel like that, but I just genuinely got this great joy out of introducing artists to other artists. And then, I'd be doing these gigs and like watching the bands in the audience watch the person playing the other band playing on stage for the first time, and they would get that same reaction that I got the first time I saw them. And so that's when I knew it wasn't just me, like there was something actually special about these acts, because all these musicians and fans that I would see at every show would come up to me and say, oh man, that band Squat Club, oh, they're the greatest band I've ever seen. Or Pirate, like, oh, they sound like 70s King Crimson meets the Mars Volta. It's awesome. Or Captain Kickass Awesomes are like, what was that? And they're just like screaming out during the show and all this kind of stuff. So, then it was like, cool, we've got a community of bands that, we found through gigging, or I was just back in the day on MySpace looking through top 8 friend lists of different bands. If you remember that, like,
Sure
oh, Pirates sound good. I wonder who's in their top 8 friends. Who's the Discus band? Oh, they sound really cool. Like, who's in their top 8 friends? Oh, there's like a Sleep Makes Waves and a Lander Configurations and a Panzer Queen and a Soul Curie. And quickly like finding all these artists, and not to mention the ozprog.com forum, which, I think how we first connected, certainly how I first found out about Lord through your amazing Kylie Minogue cover. And that's how I found Toe Hider. And I mean, that changed my life along with many other things. But yeah, the next step from there was, well, we've achieved the goal of having gigs with these awesome artists together, but how do we take this a step further? Like, how do we help an artist put an album out and promote the show and the album and start to tour and play interstate and, go from there? And I was always really adamant that there was a potential audience for this weird prog music or post rock or whatever, because I would point to, for me, it was just like basic logic, right? Like if your mum and dad is like, oh, Andy, why are you playing in a metal band? There's no future in it. You can always say, well, hang on, Metallica is one of the biggest bands in the world, so people like metal music, so why can't I be in a metal band? And I was doing the same thing with like prog and post rock, saying, well, if the Mars Volta can play to 5,000 people in Sydney, or, Sigur Rós can play to 7,000 people in Melbourne, there's no reason that a really good Australian band couldn't get in front of that audience and make the audience like them and then do the same thing. It was just, back in those days for me, it was just as simple as that. Like, oh, hey, if you like Dream Theater, then listen to Toe Hider and Arcane, and you should like them too. Or if you like Explosions in the Sky, listen to Sleep Makes Waves, you should like them too. Obviously, I didn't appreciate how finicky some people can be with their taste in music back then, but it was just that simple mathematics. Like, the numbers exist, therefore we will be successful if we find a way of getting in front of those people. But to get there, we need to get some gigs, we need to release music, get it on the radio, promote it, start to tour with other bands, play in other states, play in other countries. And apart from the great pleasure I took in like watching these artists play more shows instead of just breaking up in exasperation, as was also happening to some bands that I liked, my own band was like doing its thing but not really going anywhere. And so when these bands actually started to have opportunities to do things that I'd always dreamed of, I got such a huge kick out of that, because like I know how much it meant to them and how much it would have meant to me if I got to do that with my band. And so I felt like, I was living vicariously through some of these wins that some of the bands were having, but also I felt like having been in a band and having had the struggle and experienced all that gave me some kind of empathy to help artists through, difficult periods or periods of frustration or all that kind of stuff. And but then also not like having separation from a band, so not being like, the manager, but then also the drummer. I was able to go out there and kind of represent someone with great enthusiasm, and they wouldn't be able to turn around and say, oh, well, of course you think the band's great, you're the drummer. Like, and I was just like, oh, hey, I've made some connections of my own, through my band or through whatever else I've done. And now I'm going out there, putting my neck on the line, saying, hey, man, you have to book this band. Trust me, they're amazing. They'll bring 150 people on a rainy Saturday night. You won't be disappointed. And they would do that and deliver. And then we've got our foot in the door at the Annandale Hotel, or, Tone or Excelsior or the Espy or wherever we're playing, So that was a very long answer to your short question. But look, to be completely honest, yeah, it started with a large element of self-interest, but that quite quickly went through to some kind of altruism that has continued to this day.
Did you sort of alluded to it earlier where you're talking about ensuring, obviously you're when you're approaching an artist and you're talking to an artist and you're trying to work out what their goals are, and you want to work together to reach those goals, but also making sure that for yourself, like your overarching goals as a person and what you want to achieve are sort of always in sight for yourself. I mean, those early days where, I mean, you've always played throughout the years, you've always been a musician, but I think you've obviously lent heavy into, this other part of the industry. Have your goals, your personal goals about what you want to achieve, have they changed, or have you always had something from the early days that you still sort of, that aspirational sort of, you're talking earlier about, you see thousands of people rocking up to a show, in Sydney or Melbourne, surely, there's a bunch of Australian bands that if those people got to listen to them, then they would be converted and they'd enjoy the bands that I'm promoting. Did you have this sort of, this big blue sky goal that you've always tried to work toward?
Yeah. Man, I could go so deep with this. Great questions. Look, the biggest one, I think, and the one that I repeated like a mantra for like the first 7 or 8 years of doing Birds Robe stuff was, a Birds Robe band should be able to headline the Metro Theatre in Sydney one day. Which is, the Metro Theatre is a 1,000-cap venue in the heart of Sydney. It's an iconic room. So many legendary bands and artists have played there. And to be able to do that, like, it's not like when you're a local band, sometimes for your album launch, you sort of book a venue that's a bit bigger than what you could normally play because all your friends and family come out of the woodwork for the album launch. So let's say you normally bring 100 people to a show, which is great, by the way. But then on the album launch night, you bring 300 because everybody comes. And so you can book that slightly larger room. The Metro, like, you can't do something like that. Like, you can't book that venue unless you're going to sell 600, 700, 800 tickets, because otherwise it's clearly empty. The booking agent won't let you book it. So you have to be like a legitimate, established touring act to play that room and do it successfully. And so, I could have said, oh, yeah, the goal is to play some 400 cap room and sell it out. And obviously you need to try and do that on the way to playing a venue like the Metro. But, being in Sydney and being in a scene where the Metro is the heart of like so many amazing tours and so much, it represented so much of what was awesome around the live scene in Sydney, and it still does. That was the big goal. And it was just like, which one of these amazing Birds Robe bands is going to be able to lift its head above water and like get to do that? And I was just adamant that it should be possible. If there's 5, 6, 7,000 people out there listening to these much bigger international artists, we should be able to get to 1,000 in Sydney. And, by extension, 1,000 in Melbourne, sell out the Corner Hotel or play at the Hi-Fi / Max Watts or something, and same in the other cities as well. But that was the big thing. And when Sleep Makes Waves, I'm sort of skipping around here with the timelines, but like when Sleep Makes Waves got to a point where we were actually getting some Triple J support, and we, I say we, obviously they are the band, I'm not in the band, but we're a team. And we got to this point where they were like, oh, we sold 600 tickets to the album launch thing, and we've done these cool tours with Carnival and Dead Letter Circus. And I was just like, now's the time. Like, everything is going as great as it possibly could. Like, let's go. And I sat down with the band and I pitched to them that they're going to play the Metro the next year. And they were like, are you serious? Like, what? talking about. And like, we did it. And that show, which Triple J recorded for Alive at the Wireless, and we're releasing that recording this year, incidentally. Yeah, it was the dream come true. It didn't mean that everyone's now rolling in money and everyone's making a living from music and everyone lives happily ever after. It didn't mean anything like that at all. It just was, hey, we proved it could be done, and it was an awesome show as well. Like, we didn't just fluke it and drag everyone kicking and screaming. It was truly like a high point of the band's career, and like of just for me as a fan getting to experience that atmosphere. And then the absolute icing cherry on the cake was having it recorded so well by Triple J. Like, Triple J recording an instrumental post-rock band for Live at the Wireless. What it's ridiculous. So we got super lucky, and I still feel so fortunate we got to do that. But yeah, that was the thing. But then you get on the other side of that and you're like, what do we do? Do we do it again? What's next? How do we? And then, like, it was sort of around that time, it was like, well, the goals, obviously there are specific things for every artist they want to tick off, and that's still a goal for other artists. It wasn't like, oh, we did it with one band, so now we stop trying. Like, I would love every artist that I'm involved with to be able to experience something like that. Some never will be able to, but it's still, you still strive for it and hope that you're enjoying the journey along the way. And so, it was around like that sort of period, was just going, okay, we can achieve goals like this. We know we can do it. It's going to be a different path for everyone, but also we need to make sure that the way we're doing it is sustainable, because more than just being able to say we played a cool gig at the Metro one time, we want to be able to say that this band existed for 25 years and put out, 15 incredible albums. And, you don't want to do things that burn out a band so that when they finally play at a venue like the Metro, they play it and they break up the next week because they're so exhausted. And, so many different bands that I've worked with or my friends have been in have had so many different experiences, and they've all gone into this melting pot of knowledge, where we can go, oh, yep, we did these things to get to that goal, but we had some difficulties. So if we had our time again, we might do it, in a little bit more of a relaxed way. And that way there's no risk of the band having arguments or getting too tired or having too many relationship breakups or whatever it is. And so, anyway, that really was that was the goal. I think now really with every artist, because I'm working with artists whose music I love and I want them to keep making incredible music. It's always about how can we make this sustainable, to the extent that the musicians still want to actually make music. And then, in terms of my personal goals, I've always had aspirations to do stuff with my own band. I've been lucky enough to play in a couple of bands now that have done lots of cool things that I wanted to do, lots of things that I never even thought were possible. Like they weren't goals, but then they happened and they were awesome. But there's still a lot of stuff that I would like to achieve as a musician, but I think at a certain point, in the first few years of Birds Robe, I wasn't really in a lot of active musical projects, and I just had a period where I was like, oh well, I had my shot at being in a cool band and achieving this stuff myself. Doesn't look like it's going to happen, and that just kind of made me put more of myself into trying to help these other artists achieve those things. And then when I wasn't looking to do anything myself, these opportunities like popped up, several years later for me to be involved with, which I'm really thankful about. And I could go into loads more detail if you want, but around the time that that Sleep Makes Waves were like super busy, and other bands, the Red Paintings, Meniscus, Toe Hider, were like churning out loads of material, and I was bringing international artists over to Australia. I'd really sort of essentially given up on my individual musical goals and was really focusing on this new hobby of promoting other people and being the guy to like connect audiences with international bands and connect artists with international audiences, and I was getting a lot of enjoyment out of that. I was learning heaps. I had an office job, so financially I was okay, and so I wasn't ever really having awkward conversations with artists about money. I wasn't taking any payment or commissions from anyone. I was just doing it for the love of it, because I could afford to. And I think that kind of helped build up these relationships with a lot of the artists, and this goodwill where they were like really comfortable with me, making decisions on their behalf and representing them and all this kind of stuff, because I wasn't making decisions motivated by taking their money or trying to make money for myself. And I think that also helped me make good decisions to a certain point. I think at a later point, you probably do want some kind of financial incentive, because that incentivizes you to work harder, I suppose. But in the early days, I felt like, 10% of a $50 gig fee is $5. Like, what's the point of that? And I didn't want to put myself in a position, and I saw this with like other people in the scene at the time, where they would book too many gigs for an artist because they were getting, their $50 and they needed that to pay their rent. And it wasn't benefiting the artist strategically. Whereas I was like, oh, you should probably play a bit less often and try and really make every show a real event and an experience for your audience, so that everyone's always looking forward to it. And we should only play in like the venues that we like the most, because we want to support them and we want them to be around for longer, instead of just playing every single dive bar with a load in up 6 flights of stairs, and the audience hates it because the sound is really bad and blah blah blah. Why, if we wouldn't enjoy that as a fan, why would we expect our fans to come to see you play? So I was all about being a bit more selective and like carefully curating things. And if I was taking a commission, that would have meant taking less money, but I wasn't taking a commission, so it didn't matter. And then the artist felt like it was all coming from a good place. And I was actually, a funny little story, I didn't go into this saying, hey, all you bands, I'm going to manage you. I was just like, hey, you guys want to play this gig? Like, we'll just say that it's presented by this thing called Birds Robe, so it looks legit. And people might think it's like a legitimate night. Because there were other like small time promoters around Sydney, and they kind of built up a bit of a brand name, and people would be like, oh, that's an alternative rock night, or that's a punk night, or whatever. And so we wanted Birds Robe, people would be like, oh, Birds Robe, that's like a post-rock night. Like, haven't heard of 3 of the 4 bands, but I think we'll like them. And I was just booking gigs and like writing into the street press to promote them. And this band called Pirate were the first band to say like, hey, you're doing really good stuff. Do you want to manage us? And I was just like, oh, no, that sounds like way too much responsibility. I don't. And they're like, oh, come on, man. Like, we got such a good relationship and you do a great job. And, I was like, oh, look, I'll think about it. But I just didn't want that responsibility for like an artist's career to be on my head, especially if I stuffed it up. Anyway, some time went by and I emailed them about something, and they replied to me, and I noticed in their email signature they'd listed all their contact information, and they'd put Mike Solo as the manager. and by that stage, like, I just laughed, and I was like, all right, fine, like, whatever, let's just do it. And I realized that a lot of the stuff that I had been doing was effectively a managerial role anyway. Like, I was out there trying to negotiate opportunities for artists, and I just kind of thought that was what a booking agent was doing. But when it started to extend to like wanting to start a label and wanting to kind of help build a strategy for the artist and helping them with all kinds of other random bits and pieces, I realized, oh yeah, a manager is just however that, the role is defined based on whatever you work out with the artist, whatever the artist seems to want you to do that they can't do themselves. And similar thing happened with Sleep Makes Waves later on. Like, they just brought me on as the booking agent, and then Jono rang me up and was like, hey, I think it's about time we talk about you managing the band. And we had this big meeting, and I just said, look, I'm happy to do it. To be honest, nothing's going to change, because like all the stuff I'm already doing for you is stuff that I would just keep doing. And that's basically what a manager would do. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. We didn't even know what a manager did, because like we never had one. So, a lot of it you just make up as you go along. But anyway, I hope that answered your question. Sorry for going.
It absolutely did. Oh, I mean, it's great. It's just, I think, just being in that DIY space, that independent space, and just building things and trying different things and collaborating with lots of different people who ultimately, I mean, everyone, as you said before, trying to achieve different things. Everyone's got a different type of goal that they're aiming for, but ultimately, I guess it boils down to they're creating music, and they want as many people to hear it as possible. They want to be able to put it out there and have people enjoy it and get that reaction, that connection with people. And to be able to sort of have all of these circumstances where you're interacting with lots of different bands. I mean, as you're talking, I'm on your website, and I'm in the About section. I'm just scrolling through this like never-ending list of bands that you've worked with over the years. But it's amazing because there's so many bands there I've forgotten about as well from many years ago. Just fantastic bands. But it must be so incredible, I guess. And I don't know how often you take the time to sort of reflect back and think about a lot of this stuff, because I would assume, like, one of the questions I was going to ask you, actually, and this might be a good way to sort of lead into it, is I know that, no doubt, just the way that you've been talking about it, is that you've just got a genuine love of just doing all of this. It comes naturally to you because you just want to do it. It's not coming from a career perspective where you've got this career path that you're trying to walk down. It's just, as things pop up, you're diving at it, you're giving it a go, and you're just enjoying this whole process. But you mentioned before about having the office job, and that's being able to sort of fuel you and keep things going. But I know how difficult and how time consuming it is for one band. But for you to work with so many different bands over the years and be involved, I mean, A, where did you find the time? And that might be a really silly question because I think you just make the time. But also B, burnout and being able to be sustainable for yourself, to be able to sort of, I mean, it's not just the label, it's the managing aspect. And I know that you naturally went into that. It's the touring aspect. It's all the PR stuff. It's all this stuff. It's just, there's so many fingers that you have to have you have to have your finger in so many different pies.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, where time and burnout. I mean, it's probably a good topic to talk about.
Yeah, that's another great question, and even how you phrased it, like that question, how do you find the time? I got asked that a lot, and I still do a little bit. But yeah, I'll touch on a few things that you brought up. So, so I don't have the office job anymore. I resigned in 2017. But I had the office job for about 10 years. And so, yeah, this was just like, I was in a band when I didn't have a girlfriend, and Birds Robe started coming up, and like my whole social life was in music and Birds Robe shows and stuff. And so when I did, start dating someone, 90% of our interactions were at gigs, with bands and stuff. And so it didn't, because music was my whole social life, there wasn't sort of as much of a sacrifice in that regard as there would be later, which I'll get to. But yeah, it was just like, in terms of doing stuff, smartphones came out whenever, I don't know, the early 2010s or something. And so on my commute to work, I'd be on my phone doing all the emails and phone calls that I needed to do. Then I'd be at work. Then on my lunch break, I'd be doing more Birds Robe stuff, sitting outside or just sitting at my desk. And then as soon as work finished on the commute home, I'd be doing more Birds Robe stuff all through the evening, more Birds Robe band stuff or going to a gig or whatever. And it was just like, it was like having a second job, except I loved it. It was just like having a amazing hobby. I don't know if people love playing a sport and they got to do it, for 5 hours every day after work, or if they like playing video games or whatever, like that's what I did. And my motto was like, I don't play video games, I run a record label. Like, and I didn't, it's not that I don't enjoy playing Pac-Man. I was quite good at playing Pac-Man. I actually had the number 11 score on online Pac-Man at one point in the world. So I forgot to take a screenshot of it though. So anyway, but I was just like, oh, this thing is just so new and cool and exciting. And it's, my social life. And so I just loved it. And yeah, as you said, you just make time for it. And so I just was doing that. And I never had I had the office job. I knew how hard it was to make money in music. I never had any concept or goal to make money from it or make a living from it, because I just knew it was not possible. And so it all kind of carried along, and eventually I'd have like late nights and be tired and whatever, but like, when you love playing a gig with your band, anyone who's ever done a show or done a few shows, like you sacrifice so much for it, because it's just such a great catharsis. It's such a great feeling to be able to create and play music with people and share it and perform it. And I just loved it. It was like my escape from, staring down the barrel of like 40 years working behind a desk. And, not that I didn't enjoy my job. Like I thought really good work. I was working for the state government doing pricing regulation and economic policy advice. And like, I felt like that exercised part of my brain, and I was contributing to society by like helping, make things more efficient, and I was getting paid and had great job security and wonderful people to work with and all these cool opportunities and experiences. But ultimately I was going to be pretty much doing the same thing for 40 years. And I wanted to be creative and like have this escape from all that. And that's what music was. So I like put aside huge chunks of time and was super passionate about it. And it didn't feel like burnout. But as things go on and more opportunities start to arise and you get more involved with artists, like nothing ever goes quite as smoothly as you want it to. And when artists start touring interstate or internationally, and I, initially I was like, I want to go everywhere with the band because I want to go to Europe and see what it's like to be at this Belgian festival, and I want to go to Melbourne and watch my band play to a Melbourne audience for the first time and stand in the crowd with everyone else while they see this amazing Pirate or Sleep Makes Waves or Meniscus or whatever. But eventually I'm like, all right, I can't travel with them but now I'm getting emails in the middle of the night because the band is on tour in Italy and the promoter's ripping them off, and like, how do we solve this problem? You know, there's all these kind of unforeseen scenarios that are popping up. Like, how do I handle all this stuff? And at the same time, I'm married, and, you know, my social life isn't 100% music all the time. It's also trying to have, you know, my normal relationship and spend time with my family and all that kind of stuff. So there's no way around it. Like, it got super difficult, and I had to work out new ways of doing stuff that were more efficient, more respectful to my partner and my health and my family, and figure out a different way of kind of balancing my life. Because when you're in the moment, you're sort of always just thinking like, oh, well, and I think a lot of people face this with their jobs or other activities or loads of different things, really. It's like, oh, well, once I get past this difficult period, then it'll all be fine. And you just keep telling yourself that over and over again, but then you realize actually there's always some other thing, some other, you know, workload or difficult scenario. So if you want to have more time for a relationship or looking after your health or, you know, spending time with your brother or your cousin or your parents or whatever, like, you just have to make that time yourself and figure out a new way of doing things, and maybe say no to a couple of projects or whatever. And so my way of dealing with it was to just try and like put in place a bit more of a routine where, as a minimum, like, my health and lifestyle goals were looked after, whether that was just like some extra time for me or for me with my partner or whatever, or visiting my family. And I also just was like even more rigidly efficient with getting work done and Birds Robe admin work done. And, you know, there was so little time for procrastination or lounging around on social media, or even, you mentioned you're on the Birds Robe website, Andy. Don't look at the artist profile section. Like, I was like, no one is reading this. I don't have time to sit here for 15 hours updating every single time someone plays another show. I'll get around to this eventually, but like, I didn't start this Birds Robe thing to build an all-conquering, world-dominating brand that would reap me millions of dollars. Like, I started it as a vehicle for all the individual artists to build their own communities. So, you know, if I've got 3 hours spare on a Sunday afternoon, I'm going to log in and update some artist website for them because they don't have time, rather than go and update my own website. Now, obviously, you know, if I'm promoting someone like an international artist, I have a responsibility to them. So I do all the stuff that I need to do in that regard, but like all the kind of, oh yeah, I want to make my graphics look a bit more pretty, or, you know, write a bit more of a history of myself in my bio, like all that stuff falls by the wayside because it's not what I see as productive work. Whereas, you know, booking the next set of tour dates or having an artist meeting about their new album demos or whatever, like that's all the stuff that adds value for these artists. So it's a slightly different way of doing things. And, you know, when you try and prioritize your health and well-being and your family and the other goals you have in life, it means that there's always some extra backlog of work to do, especially when you work for yourself. But yeah, anyway, after several years, and without going into like a longer story than this already is, I got to a point where I was playing in a band, and it was like, oh, I'm making some decent money from this, and the Birds Robe thing is no longer losing me money because it seems like I've worked out how to stop losing money doing it. And so if I actually resign from my office job, I might be able to just do this full time. And so when I did that, initially that like gave me a whole lot more time. And I think a lot of artists saw that the level of service that I was providing them improved a little bit, even if it was just like my replies to their emails were slightly more in real time rather than a couple of days delayed or something. And I was able to take on more things like the merch fulfillment. You described sending out in, all the merch stuff for your merch store. And that's what I do for a lot of the Birds Robe acts. Because the alternative is like all of those artists were like trying to send out stuff themselves, but not having the time because they all had jobs and families and stuff. And I was just like, well, if I now have the time, I'll do it. I'll, negotiate cheaper postage rates so that everyone benefits from that. And I'll, kind of make it more efficient because I can go to the post office every other day and, make sure that I'm ordering envelopes in bulk and getting better rates and all kinds of stuff. And so I've been able to do stuff like that. And then since I had a son, I've been able to be at home more to look after him during the day, and especially during the pandemic and stuff like that. I wasn't having to either be at an office, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. or like try and work from home with a baby in the background. Obviously when you're touring, like you're spending time away from your family. So that's a whole other issue. But I had this dream of like, if I could work for myself for a year, even if it didn't work out and I had to go back to an office job, at least I could say that I did it. And so now it's been 4 years and I'm just still trying to keep it going as long as I can. But yeah, that was, the office job was a safety net and a security that allowed me to make investments with Birds Robe, where I could tour an international artist, and if I lost a bit of money, or if I helped float a band some cash to buy their flights overseas, and then they paid me back once they sold the merchandise in Europe, I was able to do all that kind of stuff because I had that day job. And a lot of those investments and losses were, I guess, necessary to kind of get things to a point where an artist could be profitable on their own. And, the second international tour by an artist could be profitable for them. And so I'm not losing money on it anymore. And so, I don't think I could have made that decision to resign and work for myself any earlier than I did. Because I needed to sort of learn how to do things better and pick and choose which opportunities to invest in. And also, like, certain artists had to kind of grow and get to the point where they could be profitable as well. So I think I answered your question again.
You did.
Hopefully.
Oh no, I love it. And it's trying to, I think you naturally find your way, and I think everybody naturally finds their way over time, or at least most people do, where that word of, being like sustainability, and just trying to find a way to find that balance, to play the long game. I think that's a big thing that it's sort of been something that's really been front of mind for me over the past 12 odd months with everything that's been happening around the world, and seeing a lot of friends and peers go through lots of different challenges, and seeing sort of, I think a lot of artists in particular have sort of started to realize that this really is a long game that we're playing. This is meant to be a part of our lives that we're building towards, and we can take our time. We can build the back end and get everything right, get the foundations in place. We don't have to hustle. We're not competing against everybody else. And although we're sometimes at the mercy of those release radars on Spotify and what everybody else is doing in our local scenes, or in our genre, subgenre, or whatever it might be. There's plenty of time. There's plenty of time to succeed, and it's all about making the right decisions as you go, and understanding that you don't have to shortcut it or jump the gun. And I think when the world, at least for a short space of time, more or less paused and stopped in its tracks, I think a lot of people had the ability to look through the clouds and start to realize some of these things and go, well, eventually this is going to come back, and we can pick up where we left off, and that's okay. And just listening to what, you talking through a lot of this stuff, you naturally have got to that stage through a series of events over time where you've learnt through experience that you need to make it sustainable. You went through a period where you went hard, and you were able to do it at the time, but then obviously other things in life have come in and have taken or have split your attention and your resource, your energy, and you've had to then sort of adjust and find that balance. So it's such an important thing that I just don't think a lot of artists have really thought about until probably more recent times.
Yeah, Andy, that, like, you've summed it up perfectly. And the pandemic is another great example of how a lot more people have come to that realization, just about life in general. We're obviously here talking about music, and, that's a great example of it. But yeah, look, I the way I talk about this stuff now is probably, a bit different to the way I conceived of it 10 or 11 years ago. And I feel like I'm able to talk about it more easily just because I've had more experience and seen whether things like going super hard or having breaks actually make any kind of significant difference to an artist's career. And that way, when I'm talking to an artist now, I can say with loads more confidence, like, hey, they'll be like, when do you want our next album to come out? And I'm like, hey, look, I would love for it to be out the first half of next year, but also just whenever it's ready. Like, if we move it by 3 months, it really honestly is not going to make a huge difference. And in 10 years' time, you're not going to look back and say, I wish we put out our album 3 months earlier. Those are and I'm like, people are going, should we spend the money on this thing now? Like, it'll make us a bit more comfortable, but it's $1,500. And I'm like, come on, man. Like, I want you to still be around in 15 years time. So be more comfortable. Like, have a separate bed when you go on tour with your band. And then in 15 years, we won't be wishing that you hadn't broken up because you got into fights with each other or whatever. Like, I always try and put this super long-term perspective on it. And, it was interesting because, like, everyone, I still think this happens now, but certainly in the early days when a couple of artists like Sleep Makes Waves were kicking some goals really early on. And I'd talk to other artists and they'd always be like, yeah, so, we know that what you have to do to get this success is play all these shows and, like, do this really quickly and do that, and you have to sacrifice this, and that's how you get there. And I'd be like, whoa, like, where did you get that perspective from? And they're like, oh, well, that's what Sleep Makes Waves did, or that's what Meniscus did, or something. And I'm like, no, that's not what happened at all. Like, here are these other things that, helped us get on that Europe tour or that Carnival tour support or whatever. And, you just ask me and I'll tell you all the stories, right? But, like, there's like a lot of artists kind of have this notion that you have to suffer for your art and you have to starve and you have to, like, slog it out and, be willing to get ripped off and whatever. And then finally there's a big payday at the end of it. And yeah, of course, like, there are many artist stories where that happens, but I don't think that's the reason for success. It's just so happened that, that's the way things played out. But I was just like, I'd seen, especially being manager or label manager or whatever role I had with a lot of artists, seen too many artists like struggle and be upset because they were getting burnt out to know better. And I was like, look, I've been there with all these different artists, all this like slogging it out and, whatever, it doesn't help. It's way better to just try and enjoy it every single step of the way. There'll be a few difficult moments, but overall, like, it should be a positive thing. And something else you touched on is just like, how you sort of organize your life. I had to start with myself, just being like, what does my ideal lifestyle look like? I wake up every day and I want to have X amount of time for doing work and X amount of time for spending time with family, X amount of time doing some exercise or being creative or bludging in front of the TV, whatever it is. And, whatever that ideal like design of my life looks like, how do I get there? Do I need to get some more financial flexibility or security to then be more comfortable doing that stuff? Or do I need to just, stop playing video games to have that extra 2 hours a day? Or do I need to, resign from an office job that's making me spend 3 hours commuting every day in order to have that extra time? Like, what are all the things I need to try and do? And then once I work out all that, then how can I put a plan in place to get there? And, is it going to take me 6 months or 6 years or whatever it is? And it's the same with artist goals. It's sort of like a lot of the artists will just be looking at what some other band is doing and thinking that is, they wrote the book on how to do it, when in reality it's just all about, hey, what's your goal? And what does your lifestyle look like? Let's try and design something that works for you guys so that you can be around a lot longer making great music and still achieving your goals. And it might look a bit different to what that other artist did, but hopefully we'll get to the same result in the end, or maybe somewhere better. So yeah, as you say, it's been interesting. And I think the pandemic, I know so many of us were always like, I wish I could just have one of those magic clocks from Harry Potter where you just press pause and then you can just catch up on all your life and your work and then restart the clock. And like, the pandemic in a lot of ways has kind of been that. A lot of artists that were kind of feeling like they were just on a treadmill of touring or writing or releasing music have been able to hit the pause button and go like sort out elements of their life or just have a break, and then come back to it and say, hey, let's design a way of doing this band thing, in a way that we're all a bit more comfortable with in future. And, clearly not touring for 2 years hasn't totally ended our careers. So maybe we don't have to go out and be away from our families for quite so much every year. But, it's a bit different. Like, most of the artists that I work with, they're not making a living from their music. They're doing exceptionally well in many ways, but they all have the security of other jobs. And I think because they do have that, there's a lot less pressure and expectation projected onto what music has to be for them. Music can just be a fun outlet. But for a period of time, there were some artists that were relying on it for an income or were aspiring to have it as a long-term income. And, you see the different kinds of thought processes and decision-making and stress that comes into it when it is that full-time income. And, the majority of my income these days is playing in a band that relies on live music, live performance fees. And so for me and for that band, having the pandemic was like a real big stress and like review of our situation. Was like, how long are we going to be able to survive without playing shows? And for a lot of artists in Australia and around the world, they might not be niche post-rock and prog bands, but a lot of them are still my friends, and they do rely on touring and all that kind of stuff for money. And, it has been a real tough situation for them. And, the pandemic in general, I mean, it goes without saying, like, there's been a lot of positives to come out of this period of reflection and pressing pause, because we've all tried to make the best of it. But, if you said to me, hey, you're going to work out a new great way of structuring your life, but several 100,000 people in the world are going to die. Do you want to take that deal? I'd be like, no. Can you just give me the magic clock? I'll press that button. So, but like, there's no need for anyone to feel guilty about saying that the pandemic has been good for them, or bad for them. Like, it's just, all you can do in any situation is try and make the best of it. So, someone saying, hey, yeah, actually, since the pandemic began, I've like looked after myself better and I'm feeling great. And, I'm glad I had this. It doesn't mean that you're saying you're glad all those people, were suffering. It just is what it is. I feel like I need to clarify that, because I feel like so many people have really struggled mentally because of the pandemic, because of lockdown, because of, the inability to do things that they love, whether it's music or travel or visit family. And I think, people who have not had a difficult time, who've been able to make good of it, I think those people should be able to say that, because I think there's value in sharing all those different experiences. How do you make the best of a bad situation? Like, we should all be able to learn from that. So that's why I'm always interested, people who are saying like, oh, I've really been struggling. Like, I want to know their story, because it helps me understand, all the different ways that this unique world event has affected people. But the people who say, oh, I've been doing great, I want to hear their story as well, because I might learn something about how, when these unprecedented events happen, like, what is it that, sparked some reflection in them, and like, how did they deal with it? And is it something I can learn from, or is it something I can then pass on to someone else? And, that's also an analogy for just the music industry. As you said a lot earlier in the conversation, you meet all these different people, and I used to think that networking, like, I was just like, what's the point of me networking at Big Sound, like meeting all these people who've never supported underground heavy music or prog or whatever, and probably never will. Like, what's the point of me meeting all of them? And, then I met a couple of people who were just really lovely people, and they would just tell me stories about, dealing with an artist or traveling in a certain country or whatever. And I would realize that, if you take the genre of music away, otherwise these are all just people having experiences in a creative industry, and you can learn heaps of stuff. And, we don't all have to love Discipline by King Crimson to be able to get along and have a conversation. And so I feel, like I've made some great friends who I basically have nothing to do with in a business capacity. Like, when we meet up, there's no, like, oh, we're here to do some kind of business. It's just like, hey, what are you working on? What am I working on? That all sounds really interesting. Cool. And then if I meet someone later on who sounds like they'd benefit from an introduction to that other person, then that's great. So, yeah.
I think it's a bit of that genuine curiosity just in other people. Like, obviously just having the interest, and not so much just with the intention of being able to take something from somebody, like, an idea or a lesson or anything like that. It's just that genuine interest of having a conversation and learning about how someone ticks or what their world's like. And then, and it's usually, I mean, I think you sort of mentioned this somewhere in this chat earlier on where, I think, things happen unexpectedly. So, a lot of the time you're sort of out there conversing with people or doing different things, and there's no agenda. There's no underlying agenda or intention behind it. But then opportunities pop up when you least expect it. It's that old cliche, and I think you sort of used a couple of examples earlier on where things just happen, opportunities open up, but it's not a case where you've gone to one person and said, hey, this is what I want from you. It's just a genuine approach of building relationships and learning about people where things may or may not happen down the track, but that's not the reason for conversing and interacting with people in the first place.
Yeah, that word agenda, that's what I was looking for before. Yeah, so it's, going just to connect with people because that's actually just a great thing to do with your life, is connect with other people and learn from them and listen to them and share stories. It's something I've come to appreciate. And I credit the whole Birds Robe thing with like turning me from an extreme introvert to a less extreme introvert. I was never naturally comfortable in social situations, but I feel my name being attached to Birds Robe just gives me like a little bit of a foot in the door to a bunch of conversations now, and I feel more comfortable talking to people because of it. And yeah, the thing you were referring to just with stuff happening, I was talking about goal setting and things just kind of opportunities just happening by virtue of the position that you're able to put yourself in. And like one of those examples was playing the Metro Theatre in Sydney around the same time that I was trying to get Sleep Makes Waves to that Metro level. I joined a band that then was able to headline the Metro Theatre around the same time and sell it out, and then go on to repeatedly sell out the Metro Theatre to the point where we were like, oh, well, maybe we should play the Enmore Theatre, which is 2,000 capacity. And like, that was never on the list. Like, that was never on my list, but it just happened. And it was amazing. And, similar things have happened with other artists where, it's just been like, Sleep Makes Waves, their goal was to go play South by Southwest and play in Europe. And then the opportunity came up to tour with 65 Days of Static on like a full European tour for 6 weeks. And they were like that wasn't on the list, but they were like, okay, yeah, we have to do this. It's probably a once in a lifetime experience. And then, just things going on from there with all kinds of different bands, like touring China or touring India or playing with, someone like This Will Destroy You from America, or Mew, coming to Australia for the first time, and like just all kinds of stuff like that. That like a lot of artists, those things weren't sort of on their list, or those opportunities to work with those artists weren't on my list, but then they came up and they were nevertheless awesome things that brought about just as much joy as some of the all-time bucket list goals. And so a lot of it is like, sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, and it's the same with meeting and talking to different people. You just hear stories that you may have never conceived of before, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh shoot, like that's a great piece of advice to keep in mind, or wow, I never knew that experience was possible, maybe I should check that out. And whether it's a music thing or a life thing, whatever it is, it's just it's definitely just a worthwhile use of time, and as is reading books and listening to podcasts, for example, such as this one. All very worthwhile uses of time.
Yeah, definitely. I could keep talking to you for ages. I think just talking shop and just all the ins and outs of just just that hustle. And hustle in a good way, not in a burnout sort of way, but just really sort of being intentional about making decisions. And I think even you sort of alluded to it earlier about sort of being the busyness of getting stuck into something that ultimately may not be driving the putting you in the right direction for those larger goals, and prioritizing things and sacrificing things. And it's just so many different topics that I could just chew your ear off for hours. But we might have to actually make that time and catch up in person. We'll do another chat. But I know that you're getting closer to the end of this Kickstarter campaign for the documentary for Birds Robe. Do you want to give a quick rundown of that? Because I'll definitely have this out before that ends.
Yeah. Thanks so much, man. I appreciate that, and yeah, thanks for bringing it up. You mentioned earlier in the chat about all the different bands and whether I get a chance to sort of reflect on all of it. And what we're doing is making a documentary series based around Birds Robe, and it's going to talk a bit about what Birds Robe is and how it started, and what's kind of come along from day one until now, and how we've pulled a bunch of artists together and sold out shows all over the world and had artists nominated for ARIAs and in the charts and on radio and selling records and touring and all this kind of stuff. But I think more importantly, what I wanted to do is actually feature a lot of the individual artists, and there'll be artists that people are more familiar with, like We Lost the Sea and Toe Hider and Sleep Makes Waves and Closure in Moscow. And I want to really basically give them features on their careers, because that's what fans of those bands are really interested in, but go into a little bit more detail about the difficulties that they've had, how they approach music and life and touring, and a lot of the same topics that you and I have discussed today. And then also, cast a bit of a spotlight on some of the bands that maybe aren't active anymore, but who are really instrumental, pun intended, in getting those early days of Birds Robe to feel like the community and family and being as successful as it was. And I guess this kind of just ties into another point I wanted to make, which is, all those bands that were part of the early days of Birds Robe, I wasn't sitting there picking who's going to become successful and focusing all my attention on them. I was just trying to create as many opportunities as I could for as many of those artists as I could, and just whatever people latched onto, they were going to be the artists that would drag everyone else up with them. And so there wasn't any calculated plan. It wasn't like I saw a band and was like, they're going to be huge, they're going to be on Triple J, they're going to do this. It was just here are all the opportunities and connections and everything. And, it looks like people like these guys, so let's try and run with that. And then, 2 years later, it looks like people are connecting with these guys. Let's try and run with that. And they all go off in different directions. And so a lot of those early artists were responsible for creating a scene and a community that was able to be fertile enough to nurture the growth of some of these artists that are now still active today and doing really well. So, we're just running a Kickstarter campaign to help fund some of the production costs for that, because I wanted to, bring in some extra help to help produce it and tell the stories and really go wide with the interviews. We're not just talking to band members and having them say, we formed because we picked a name out of a hat. I want to talk to the crew that were on tour with them and saw everything, the media and the fans that have seen the evolution of these acts, and, the people in the industry that maybe, had to be convinced to give them some opportunity, but then they took it and they ran with it. And I also want to show the connections between all these different artists and, share how they feel about each other, whether it's good or bad, how they kind of influenced each other and all that kind of stuff, and get a whole bunch of different perspectives represented. So we're pretty close to meeting that Kickstarter goal. We just need a couple more $1,000 to get it over the line, and I've just been really overwhelmed with the kind words and support from people when we announced that we were doing it, and the genuine excitement of the artists to be involved and talk about themselves and their friends, and their willingness to go over some of the difficult stuff as well as the happy stuff. So if anyone wants to check it out, I think if they just Google Birds Robe Kickstarter, or if they go to the birdsrobe.com website, they can find out more information, and there's a whole background spiel and a little video where you can hear more of my monotone voice if you want. And look, I really appreciate the chat and the opportunity to talk about that as well. Andy, thanks so much. It's still awesome for me to get to be asked about all this stuff, and I genuinely really enjoy just telling stories and hearing how you perceive all this stuff as well. So really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And I'll chuck a link in the show notes and in the little description field so people can just click through and hopefully support. I think I was really excited with the announcement. I think it's a great idea, and just the way that you've contextualized it and framed it, it's more than just a sort of baseline documentary of just doing a bit of a recap and a reflection. It's really sort of going down a number of different paths and sort of getting deep from different perspectives. And I think just talking to you tonight and just getting a little bit more of that substance, it's sort of adding another level of excitement to what this project is. So hopefully other people that have been listening will get inspired and click through and throw a couple of dollars your way for the project and reach target and be waiting for that eventual release when it comes out. But mate, I said earlier in the chat, like, I really admire like what you do and what you have done over the years. It's just, there needs to be more people out there doing the type of work that you do. I think bands, just regardless of whether you get management or you go on a label or anything like that, I think there's just a lot of fundamental things that are part of your makeup that I think people can really learn and apply just in their day-to-day of just being a musician or being in a band. Just so many sort of just great approaches and just great outlooks and mindsets that can just make such a massive difference and take a lot of the load off, a lot of that stress that is just completely unnecessary. It's old baggage from other eras that have just dragged on, and a lot of myths that are out there that just don't need to be, we just don't need to spend any time on them. So hopefully people have got a few things out of this and dig into your world a bit more. And yeah, I'll certainly be waiting for this doco. I can't wait.
Thanks, man. Look, thanks so much again for the kind words. If I can just add a couple of things quickly, I generally try and be accessible. So if people want to ask questions about any kind of random stuff, they can always just email me and I'll try and find the time at some point. I don't want it to feel like it's, people, I think sometimes there's this perception of like, he'll get annoyed if I ask this dumb question or whatever. And it's not like that at all. I would rather talk to people, and that, I'll have stories like this that come up in the documentary, just like artists that I would have loved to work with who didn't ask me because they thought I was too busy or something. I wouldn't like it. Sorry, the other thing, I feel like, I'm sorry, Andy, I have to just tell everyone that Toe Hider is like one of the best musicians in the world, and everyone should listen to Toe Hider. And I feel like you'll appreciate that, but like, he is incredible, and he's such a huge part of the reason why I do all this stuff. So anyway, if any of the Andy listeners are not familiar with Toe Hider, check it out. But yeah, man, so much of what you said just really hits the mark. Like, we should definitely catch up and just hang out and talk more about this stuff sometime. So anytime is good.
Sounds good, man. I can't agree more about Toe Hider. I'm glad you managed to shove that in right at the end there. I'm sure Mike, if Mike listens to this, he's going to be cringing, but deep down he really appreciate it. I know he gets a bit awkward with that stuff, but he's too modest for his own good.
Yeah, exactly. That's why. But I guess. Sorry, another thing that, like, people who don't know, there used to be a website called ozprog.com with a forum on it, and there were all these different artist forums for like Lord and Toe Hider and Arcane and Caligula's Horse and all these amazing bands. And I just kind of stumbled across this community, and there are people like yourself, Andy, and Mike from Toe Hider, and Jim from Caligula's Horse, like actively posting. And that's where I first felt like there was some kind of like community across Australia of people interested in music and interested in helping each other with advice and, promoting cool music. And I just have such a great fondness for all those people that I met online through those like first internet interactions. And it's just so amazing that we're here in 2021 and like you're running a podcast and smashing it with Lord. Mike Mills is doing Toe Hider for a living now. Like, that was one of my dreams when I first heard his music. Was like, oh my God, I hope that one day this guy can just like make a living out of this. This is amazing. And, we don't even need to talk about like all the goals that Caligula's Horse are kicking. And, those guys have just worked so hard for all of that stuff. So, look, I don't know. I feel like I'm just gushing and using up your podcast time now, but it's just, I'm not just sitting here being like, we deserve it, blah, blah, blah. I'm just genuinely just in awe of like how so many people from all the way back then are sitting here now, and there's still like brand new exciting things happening. Like Lord is charting with a covers record, and it's awesome. It's just, it's unbelievably cool. So thanks again for taking the time, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, I love a little bit of a call to action. So, folks, if you've ever listened to any artist that's ever been a part of the Birds Robe roster or the collective, you can go to birdsrobe.com, go to the About section alone. Don't worry about the artists section, but go to the About section and you can see the long list of bands that Mike has worked with, both Australian and international artists. And if you've ever listened to any of these artists, please consider being a part of this Kickstarter campaign. I'm going to have a link in the show notes or in the description of whatever you're listening to this through right now. And click through, have a look at the campaign. There's an awesome little trailer that's been put together to explain it, and an awesome story that really contextualizes what this project is all about. And I think this can only do amazing things for the Australian music scene and for music fans worldwide. I think this is just an amazing thing that Mike is putting together. So please consider getting behind it. The project, the Kickstarter campaign ends on the 23rd of May at 7:56 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, just to be really specific there. But let's just say by Saturday, the 22nd of May. Please consider getting amongst this. And my international friends, just remember that we live in the future. So if you listen to this on time, please get in there earlier rather than later. And let's see if we can help Mike reach his Kickstarter goal to, as I said earlier, kickstart this project. There you go. So go and check it all out. I'll have everything in the show notes, of course, over at andysocial.net and andydowling.net. I'll have the social media links for Birds Robe, for Mike. Everything that we've discussed will be over there. So go and check it all out. Now, before we wrap it up, of course, patreon.com/andydowling. Can't stress enough, it's the best way to support this podcast. And one of my goals for this year is to get as many $1 supporters as possible. So what that means is It's $1 a month. Literally, that's it. And it's a little feel-good payment. It's a little warm, fuzzy feeling that you get. You won't even notice it, and it's a great way just to back me and this podcast. This podcast is getting closer and closer to 6 years, which is just insane. And we're getting closer to 300 episodes as well. And the Patreon community is the reason why this thing still exists. It's just absolutely amazing. So go to patreon.com/Andy Dowling if you want access to the Patreon podcast episode that comes out each Tuesday, or free stuff, free shit, giveaways. There are additional tiers there that you can support in a number of different ways. But ultimately, if I can get you guys on the $1 tier and just chucking me a buck a month, then that would be absolutely amazing. So patreon.com/Andy Dowling. And a massive thank you in particular to the people that are on my top 2 tiers on Patreon. These guys are the heavy hitters. These guys are the massive contributors who support this podcast. Just throw me ridiculous money every month, and I'm just continuously thankful for their support. So thank you in particular to Andrew from Perth, Mick G from Sydney, Ash from Deniliquin, Dan from Dapto, Rod from Rayleigh in North Carolina, Patrick from Canberra, Liam from Brisbane, Chris from Sydney, Brendo from Leeton, Tim from Canberra, James from Brisbane, Christian from Canberra, Steve from the Gold Coast, and Andrew from Sydney. Thank you very much, guys. These folks are part of the wider community of just absolutely amazing people who support me and the Andy Social Podcast over at Patreon. So please go and check it all out. If you've got any questions, hit me up. But it's just, as I said, it's the reason why this podcast still exists, and why it's still firing on all cylinders most of the time, and it's doing 2 episodes a week as well. It's because of the amazing people over at Patreon. So I'm going to stop gushing about the people over at Patreon, but go and check it all out over at patreon.com/Andy Dowling. Now, next episode, I have got, now if all goes to plan, I'm just thinking, I'm trying to think ahead of here, trying to be a little bit more planned. I'm going to have an international guest on the podcast, somebody you may not be familiar with, but I want to introduce you to this person, a musician playing some great music, has an album coming out in the next month or 2, and just a really, really cool guy. And I'm looking forward to sharing this chat with you and introducing you to this person, and hopefully you'll become a fan of him and his music. So I'll leave it at that. Until next episode, folks, take care, and ta-ta.